Hey guys, my name is Charlene Almer, and today I will be presenting on the different types of assault on women in correctional facilities. So a quick overview of what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the sexual assault, physical, and mental assaults that happen within correctional facilities for these women. And then we'll look at the effects, have a conclusion, look at the references, of course, and then at the end I'll have the questions and feedback for you guys. All right, so first we will start with sexual assault. Now, according to Cook and Lane, one of their articles, they said that in correctional facilities, it is suggested that up to 30% of female inmates are victims or targets of sexual assault. And they also stated that 5% of these prisoners reported experiencing at least one of the incidents of sexual victimization within that year that it happened, and then only 2% of those inmates indicated that it was by either one of their peers or one of their inmates that is in that prison. Also, in another article by Cook and Lane that I found really interesting was that once a female places a blame on someone, whether it's another inmate, but more likely for a correctional officer, the more believable that their story is, so with more evidence that they have, the more blamable that they come off. So basically, the more evidence that they have to back them up, the more people believe that they are the creation or the intention of the sexual assault. And then in a third article, I have from Struckman Johnson. It was a female and a male with the same last name. They went to 3 different facilities. So facility 1, they asked people what they believed that the rate of sexual assault was within their facilities. So the first facility, inmates said that they believed it was 21% and the staff believed that it was 10%, when actually overall total at the end of their study it was 27%. In facility 2, inmates again said 11%, while staff said 2%, when there was an overall total of 9% sexual assault. And then in the third facility, it was 13% from the estimated inmates and 4% from the estimated staff, but in total it was actually 8%. So continuing on with the sexual assault, I really wanted to add this graph in just because I think it's really interesting seeing the age distribution of sexual assault victims within the correctional facilities. Again, this is for the women. And as you can see, the younger the women, the higher the assault rates are, and this comes from a Felsen et al. Study. And it sort of talked about how the younger they are, the more likely they are to be victimized because of their beauty or, the sexuality that they can give off. And then the older you are, the more likely that they're only going to be sexually assaulted based off of convenience and absolute need. So I thought, that's pretty disgusting to assault someone just because, it's convenient. Even to assault someone in general. So for physical assaults in correction facilities, minorities were looked at being more of the convict style, so having more of that aggression and just overall meaner demeanor, and that comes from Steiner and Wooldridge. And in another study by Wolf et al., 20% of female inmates were more likely to have that aggression onto other female inmates, and then 82 per 1,000 was staff on female inmate violence. So 0.082% compared to a significant difference according to the study in men too. And I have another graph in the next slide to sort of help everyone see that. It was also stated in Williams and Porter that these minorities, the African American and Native American females, are considered the most violent just based off the aggression that they saw. which I guess isn't really a fair representation, because it is also stated that African American women especially are more of the majority that are incarcerated in these correctional facilities. And then there's just overall an inadequate access to needs, and that is from Harner and Riley. And some of these needs include like the gynecologist or the dermatologist, gastrointestinal people. And they stated that when they needed these doctors to help them, they were basically dismissed by the providers in those correctional facilities, saying that they were the providers were too busy, or that they didn't care to see them at the moment. And then whenever they did get results back, it was never told to them, you know, what exactly was happening through these results. So that's another issue that is faced with these incarcerated women as well. So like I said in the last slide, I was going to bring up the Wolf et al. Study. Here's a graph from that. So you can really see, I'm basically just going off the female section here. What really intrigued me was the incidence for inmate on inmate or staff on inmate, and then the dependency on the weapons. So you can see that the majority is without the weapon compared to the men where it's more with weapon. Now I'm really interested as to know why, so I have to dig further into that, like the difference on how are men more accessible to weapons compared to women, what's the likelihood of them making it compared to women and stuff like that. So I really just wanted you guys to see like the dependency on the weaponry and that violence. Now, for mental assault, it's sort of going to be more orientated towards like the mental health aspect and how there's trauma. So it's going to be a little longer compared to the other slides, but I'll break it up so it's not too much. So I want to start off with like the 4 different areas or studies that I touched on. So for physical health, there's just like an overall disregard for physical health that leads into the inadequacy feeling that a lot of the women in these correctional facilities get, because they're basically told that, you know, we don't care about what you did, like you're a bad guy, so sorry. And that comes from Walsh, and you know, it's just they face a poor routine of care and for their reproductive rights, which as women we know is very important, and not just like for women, this is also for men. Like our reproductive health is such a big part of who we are because of the abilities that we can do with it. So it's really traumatic to not be able to get that health factor taken care of within that correctional facility, which causes a huge amount of trauma and depression and other things like that. There's also another study with Green where a psychologist was brought in, and they looked at a sample of a couple hundred or 100 female inmates, and they looked at their past, and a lot of them already had mental disorders. So going into incarceration, it was elevated by a significant percent. And then there's the drugs and alcohol that was decreased, however, did make them more physical and more agitated because it was like a cold turkey quit. And then according to Mollard and Hudson, now these ladies were nurses that conducted this experiment, the increase of women incarcerated went up a significant amount in 6 years, up to 23% in the United States. Now these women also, you know, were people that were exposed to trauma prior to being incarcerated, which also served a significant harshness on their mental health as well. And then that also was increased within because of physical or sexual assault that could happen within these prisons. And then from a day at all, they also talked about how sexual assault was basically a proponent of helping them commit mental assault by the people that committed these against the women, whether it's other inmates or the staff. And these women, when they were talking to psychologists or anyone of that sort, express that their paranoia, their depression, their anger, like their lifestyle has just completely changed from before. All right, so for effects, it's sort of based off things that happened during the incarceration or after the incarceration, after these assaults. So in the Fenson et al. Study, it talked about the violence presence is only around when there's lack of access to the thing that they are committing the violence for. So in regards to sexual assault, someone has sexual desires, but they cannot do it because either A, no one wants to do it, or B, they just are incapable of doing it. So therefore they do it in the assaulting way by either committing rape or just assault in general by the groping, touching, inappropriateness of that, which I thought was really interesting. So I decided that that really needed to be added, but it didn't really have a place in that sexual assault category because it is something that is also physical and mental, because it's a combination of all those three things in order to be committed. And there's also just the maltreatment overall of not just like the inmates, but also the staff, because it's a hard area to be around. And if it's hard on the staff, it's going to be 10 times worse for the inmates because they're the people that have to deal with the staff, especially if it's the staff committing the violence or the assault on the inmates. And it's not just that, it's also the effect that happens through the physicalness, such as their maltreatment through like needing doctors or anything like that. And then also there is, as I stated, justice for injustice. So there's, acts that were created, such as the Prison Elimination Act, Prison Rape Elimination Act, I'm sorry, and they see that these things are happening, so they just create these acts or these justices that they think will help in that category. And it's not necessarily not going to help, but it's just like a cover-up instead of actually dealing with the situation. So that's an effect that I thought was very necessary, that needed to be talked about, because in the end of the day, this is also an addition to the assault that happens, which is a huge mental assault off of that, because it's sort of saying, hey, this happens and we're going to say that this happens, but it's not necessarily true that they're going to get the full amount of time, or it's not really considered as harsh. So kind of screw you, which is, which really needs to be identified and talked about. All right, so in conclusion, we talked about the sexual, physical, mental assaults that happen within the incarcerated areas, as well as the effects that come from that, mentally, physically, emotionally, and then of course the maltreatments and the justices for the injustices. And here are the references that I used. All right, discussion and feedback. My discussion question is, why is mental assault a larger category than physical or sexual assault? And I sort of talked about that in the mental assault category. So you can go back there and find that out. And then for my feedback, how was the overall structure of the presentation? And did you feel like you received adequate information in relation to incarcerated women in the correctional facilities? I want to see how you guys sort of feel about how I presented on this topic, just because it's something new to me. So your honest feedback would be great. Again, because it is something new and something that I'm not necessarily like absolutely, 100% invested in, but I learned a lot of great new things that I will be touching up on. So that's always fun as well.